I stared at my phone in disbelief, the banking app still open on the screen showing a balance of $42.17. Just yesterday, our joint accounts had held over $320,000, our life savings, emergency fund, and the money I'd been setting aside for my nephew's college fund. Gone. All of it, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. What Andrew didn't realize as he emptied our finances for his young marketing coordinator was that in 3 short months, I would orchestrate the complete transfer of Caldwell Manufacturing, his family's 60-year-old company, to their largest competitor. Let me tell you how I transformed from a betrayed wife to the architect of the perfect corporate revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Harborview restaurant had always been our special place. With its panoramic views of Lakeside's shimmering waters and the twinkling city skyline, it had witnessed 18 years of anniversary celebrations, business victories, and quiet romantic evenings. Tonight was supposed to be our wedding anniversary. 18 years of what I had believed was partnership, trust, and mutual respect. I'd booked the Sapphire Room, the restaurant's most exclusive private dining space, weeks in advance. Selected Andrew's favorite vintage of Barolo, arranged for chef's special tasting menu, and even prepared a surprise gift, a vintage watch I'd tracked down that matched the one his grandfather had given his father. 18 years deserved to be celebrated properly. I arrived early to ensure everything was perfect. The table settings gleamed under the crystal chandelier, roses and hydrangeas arranged exactly as requested, the wine already breathing. The maitre d' had just finished showing me the special dessert presentation when my phone buzzed with a notification, probably Andrew letting me know he was on his way. Instead, it was our bank sending an alert about unusual activity. Multiple transfers totaling $328,650 had been completed within the last hour. My stomach dropped as I quickly logged into our account to find it nearly empty. A quick check of our savings, investment account, and even my personal account showed the same. All emptied except for nominal amounts. 18 years of careful saving, gone in less than an hour. My hands shook as I called Andrew. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Emergency. Call me immediately." No response. I was about to call the bank's fraud department when I spotted them through the restaurant's glass doors. Andrew walked confidently across the marble floor, his hand placed possessively on the lower back of a woman who was definitely not me. Vanessa Parker, Caldwell Manufacturing's newest marketing coordinator, glided beside him in a dress I recognized from the company's recent trade show expenses. My husband was guiding his mistress to our anniversary dinner, while my phone displayed the digital evidence of his financial betrayal. Rebecca. Andrew's voice carried that familiar, patronizing tone he'd perfected over years of explaining business, concepts I already understood. "I'm glad you're here. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation about the future." He pulled out a chair for Vanessa, my chair at the table I had arranged, as if this were a perfectly normal business. Dinner. The young woman at least had the decency to look uncomfortable as she sat down, her fingers nervously adjusting the gold bracelet on her wrist. "I see you've brought company to our anniversary dinner," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Years of high-stakes business negotiations had taught me to maintain composure when everything was falling apart. "Anniversary," Vanessa whispered, looking at Andrew with sudden alarm. "A formality at this point," Andrew replied, reaching for the wine I'd selected. He examined the label with approval, not even glancing at me as he continued. "I think we're all adults here. Our marriage hasn't been working for some time, and I've been planning a transition." "A transition," I repeated, the word hanging in the air between us. "Is that what we're calling emptying our bank accounts without discussion?" Andrew's hand paused mid-pour, the first sign that he hadn't expected me to discover the financial betrayal quite so quickly. "You've checked the accounts," Difficult not to when my phone was lighting up with fraud alerts during dinner preparations, I replied, nodding toward the carefully arranged table. Though I suppose fraud is technically the correct term. I've had my legal team draw up a fair settlement, Andrew continued, reaching into his briefcase as if we were discussing a routine business matter. Given your contribution to Caldwell, over the years I think you'll find the terms generous. I allowed myself a small smile. My contribution to Caldwell Manufacturing had been considerably more than Andrew ever acknowledged publicly. After completing my MBA with a focus on corporate finance, I'd given up a promising career at a global consulting firm to help stabilize the family business during a difficult transition. While Andrew took the title of CEO after his father's semi-retirement, it was my financial restructuring that had pulled the company back from the brink of bankruptcy 10 years ago. How interesting that you mention my contribution, I said, reaching for my own portfolio. I also have some documents I think we should discuss. Andrew frowned, clearly annoyed by my failure to collapse into tears or rage. He'd always underestimated my emotional control, mistaking my preference for privacy as weakness. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to discover, was that I had been watching the subtle shifts in company operations for months. Late night, meetings, unusual expenses, sudden personnel changes in key departments. The signs of impending betrayal had been there for anyone paying attention. "Becca, this isn't the time to discuss company business," he said dismissively. "This is about our personal situation." "Is it?" I asked softly. "Because your recent activities suggest the two are quite intertwined." I laid a folder on the table, expense reports showing a disturbing pattern of company funds being used for personal purposes. Weekend business conferences that matched Vanessa's social media posts from romantic getaways. A company lease on B. A luxury apartment downtown that didn't appear in any official corporate housing documentation. Jewelry purchases logged as client appreciation gifts. Vanessa's face drained of color as she recognized several of the locations, and likely the bracelet on her wrist, documented in the folder. "You've been going through confidential company records," Andrew snapped, attempting to gather the papers. "Board members have full access to financial documentation," I reminded him calmly. "Section 4(3) of the corporate bylaws your father established. The same father who specifically requested I join the board to keep an eye on the numbers." What Andrew had conveniently forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that his father Harold had recognized my financial acumen long before Andrew had. While Andrew had been the public face of Caldwell Manufacturing, handling sales, and client relationships, I had quietly become Harold's trusted advisor on financial matters. When Harold had moved to a semi-retired advisory role 10 years ago, he had insisted I take a position on the board despite Andrew's objections. "These are routine business expenses," Andrew insisted, though his confidence was clearly shaken by my preparedness. "The board has approved all departmental budgets." "The board approved standard operating budgets," I corrected him. "They didn't approve the systematic misallocation of funds you've been orchestrating for the past year." I turned to Vanessa, whose earlier discomfort had transformed into visible panic. "Did you know that using company funds for personal benefit is considered embezzlement? Or that the marketing director position Andrew promised you was created by terminating 3 long-term employees whose combined salaries still didn't match your proposed compensation?" Andrew's face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Rebecca. This is precisely why our marriage has failed. You've never understood how to separate business from personal matters." The irony of his statement might have made me laugh if the stakes weren't so serious. I had spent years carefully maintaining professional boundaries within the company, never trading on my position as the CEO's wife, while Andrew had been using corporate resources as his personal piggy bank. "I think I understand the separation quite well," I replied, retrieving my phone and sending a quick text. "In fact, I've arranged for someone to join us who might provide some valuable perspective on the matter." Andrew's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you doing? Who? He was interrupted by the arrival of the maître d', who approached with practiced grace. Mr. Turner has arrived as requested, Mrs. Caldwell. Andrew froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. Michael Turner? From Westbrook Industries? Michael Turner entered the private dining room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 55, the CFO of Westbrook Industries, Caldwell Manufacturing's largest competitor, carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that came from competence rather than bluster. His presence in the Sapphire Room was nothing short of incendiary. "Michael," I greeted him warmly. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Drew," Michael nodded coolly toward my husband before turning to me with a genuine smile. "Rebecca, always a pleasure." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Though I admit, this is an unusual setting for our conversation. "What conversation?" Andrew demanded, rising halfway from his seat. "What the hell is going on, Rebecca?" "Please, sit down, Drew," I said calmly. "As you said, we're all adults here. I thought it was time for an honest conversation about the future." I echoed his earlier words deliberately, watching recognition dawn in his eyes. "You've been meeting with Westbrook," he said, voice low with barely contained fury. "You're betraying the company." "Interesting choice of words," I mused, gesturing for Michael to take a seat. "Especially coming from someone who just emptied our joint accounts without discussion." Michael raised an eyebrow at this but said nothing, merely opening his portfolio and retrieving several documents. "Our personal finances have nothing to do with," Andrew began, but I cut him off smoothly. "Actually, they have everything to do with this situation," I said. "You see, when I noticed unusual patterns in company expenses 6 months ago, I began documenting everything. I thought perhaps you were under financial pressure you hadn't shared with me. Instead, I discovered something far more concerning. A pattern of financial mismanagement that placed the entire company at risk." I laid out another set of documents, detailed analyses of Caldwell Manufacturing's increasingly precarious financial position. Reports that showed how Andrew had been leveraging company assets to fund what appeared to be preparations for a life with Vanessa. Property purchases, unauthorized bonuses, questionable consulting contracts with companies that shared her address. "The board doesn't know about any of this," I continued, "but they will during Monday morning's emergency session." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Drew, you said the finances were solid. You said the company could easily afford—" "Be quiet," Andrew hissed, his mask of civilized control slipping further. Michael Turner cleared his throat. "If I may, the financial situation at Caldwell is indeed concerning. Based on Rebecca's analysis, which my team has independently verified, the company's cash reserves have been depleted by nearly 40% in the past year alone. Most shareholders are unaware that the recently announced expansion was funded almost entirely through high-interest loans rather than operational profits." Andrew's face had gone from red to ashen. "You've been sharing confidential financial information with our biggest competitor. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Created a soft landing for a company in free fall," Michael replied matter-of-factly. "Westbrook Industries is prepared to make an offer that would preserve jobs, maintain client relationships, and ensure Caldwell's legacy continues, albeit under new management." I watched Andrew carefully as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just about exposing his affair or his financial misconduct. This was about the company his grandfather had built from nothing, the legacy his father had entrusted to him, and how thoroughly he had betrayed that trust. "This is absurd," Andrew sputtered, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling our legal team right now. This constitutes industrial espionage. Corporate—" "I wouldn't," I interrupted smoothly. "Not unless you want to explain to them why the SEC has already received a comprehensive report documenting potential securities fraud at Caldwell Manufacturing." A report that specifically identifies you as the primary actor. Andrew's finger froze above his phone screen. You're bluffing. She's not, Michael confirmed. The documentation was filed yesterday as a protective measure. If this conversation ended productively, an amended filing could be submitted clarifying certain points. The maitre d' approached, again, this time carrying a tablet. Mrs. Caldwell, the video conference is ready as requested. I nodded my thanks. Perfect timing. The board members should be joining us shortly for a preliminary discussion. The board? Andrew's voice cracked slightly. On our anniversary? Given the circumstances, I replied, gesturing toward Vanessa. I thought it appropriate. Your father will be joining as well. The color drained completely from Andrew's face at the mention of his father. Harold Caldwell might have stepped back from day-to-day operations, but his moral authority within the company remained absolute. The founder's ethics and business principles were legendary in Lakeside's business community, principles his son had systematically violated. My father is at Lakeside Estates. He's not well enough to— That's another conversation we should have, I interrupted, opening another folder. These are your father's medical records for the past year. Interestingly, they show no cognitive decline whatsoever. In fact, his doctors have repeatedly certified him fully competent for business decisions. Yet somehow, all board communications to him have been rerouted through your office. Care facility staff report that approved visitors have been mysteriously turned away due to doctor's orders that don't exist in any medical documentation. Andrew's hands clenched into fists on the table. You've been going behind my back to my father? Someone needed to keep him informed about what was happening to his life's work, I replied calmly. Especially once I discovered you were systematically isolating him from company operations while undermining the financial foundation he spent 60 years building. The tablet screen flickered to life, showing a video conference with several faces already present. Among them was Harold Caldwell, looking considerably more alert and engaged than the frail figure Andrew had been describing to board members. Beside him sat Diana Chen, Caldwell Manufacturing's HR director, whose expression confirmed she had been fully briefed on the situation. Hello, son. Harold's voice was steady and clear. I believe we need to talk about the future of Caldwell Manufacturing. Andrew stared at the screen, the final pieces of his carefully constructed world visibly crumbling around him. What he hadn't realized, what he had never bothered to learn during his years of dismissing my contribution, was that I had spent 18 years building relationships throughout the company. While he had been focused on the appearance of power, I had been quietly accumulating actual influence through competence, consistency, and care for the business his family had built. Dad, I can explain, Andrew began, but Harold raised a hand to silence him. Diana has shared Rebecca's complete documentation with me, the older man said gravely. The board will review everything formally on Monday, but I've seen enough to make some immediate decisions under the emergency provisions in our corporate charter. Andrew looked wildly around the table, his eyes finally settling on me with dawning comprehension. You planned all of this. For how long? Long enough, I replied quietly. Though I should thank you for the anniversary dinner reservation. It provided the perfect setting. As the board members began discussing the immediate suspension of Andrew's authority and the appointment of an interim leadership team, I excused myself and stepped outside the private dining room. In the quiet hallway of the harbor view, I took a moment to absorb what was happening. The evening had unfolded exactly as planned, yet I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what had been lost and determination for what would come next. Through the glass, I could see Andrew gesturing frantically as he tried to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond his ability to manipulate. Vanessa had retreated to a corner, frantically texting what I assumed were urgent messages to her attorney. Michael Turner was calmly outlining Westbrook's preliminary offer to the board members on screen. The weight of my grandmother's locket felt heavy against my chest. the same locket I'd worn when I first met Andrew at a charity gala 19 years ago. Inside was a small photo from our wedding day, a reminder of what we'd once been and what he'd thrown away. As I prepared to return to the dining room and face the next phase of the evening, I thought about the long game I'd been playing. 6 months of careful planning, of quiet meetings with Michael Turner, of documenting every financial irregularity and corporate misstep. Andrew had always underestimated me, dismissing my financial expertise and business acumen as secondary to his role as the face of Caldwell Manufacturing. His mistake had been forgetting that while he was performing the role of CEO, I had been doing the actual work of protecting and building the company his family had created. Now those same skills would be his undoing. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to return to the Sapphire Room. The next phase of my plan was about to begin, and I intended to savor every moment of Andrew's realization that he'd not only lost his
marriage, but the family legacy his grandfather and father had spent decades building. Sometimes the perfect revenge requires patience, precision, and the ability to see 10 moves ahead. Andrew was about to learn that he wasn't the only one who
knew how to play corporate chess. As I returned to the Sapphire Room, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Andrew stood rigidly at the far end of the table, his earlier confidence replaced by a barely controlled panic. Vanessa had retreated further into her corner, her fingers frantically tapping on her phone screen. Michael Turner sat calmly reviewing documents while the board members' faces on the video screen showed expressions ranging from concern to outright anger. "Rebecca," Harold's voice carried through the speakers as I took my seat. "I was just explaining to Andrew that the board will be conducting a formal review of all financial transactions for the past 18 months. "You can't do this," Andrew insisted, though the force had gone out of his voice. "I built Caldwell into what it is today. Without me. Without you," I interjected smoothly. "The company might not be facing potential SEC investigations or carrying the excessive debt load you've accumulated while misrepresenting our financial position to shareholders." I laid another document on the table, a comprehensive analysis of Caldwell Manufacturing's true financial position compared with the reports Andrew had been presenting to the board. The discrepancies were staggering. "According to your quarterly presentations," I continued, "Caldwell's cash reserves have been steadily growing. The reality, however, is that those reserves have been systematically depleted to fund unauthorized expenses, including," I glanced meaningfully at Vanessa, "certain personnel decisions that bypassed normal HR protocols." Diana Chen spoke up from beside Harold on the video screen. "The HR department has identified 17 instances in the past year where standard hiring and compensation practices were circumvented by direct intervention from the CEO's office." Andrew's jaw tightened. "As CEO, I have full authority to make hiring decisions based on the company's needs without bureaucratic interference." "The company's needs," Harold repeated, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Is that what you call creating a 6-figure position for an unqualified individual with whom you're having a personal relationship?" Vanessa flinched at the characterization, but remained silent, her eyes fixed on her phone. "The board approved all budget allocations," Andrew insisted, though his defense was growing weaker with each new revelation. "The board approved budgets based on financial reports that were, at best, misleading," Michael Turner noted, his tone professional rather than accusatory. He turned to face the video screen. "Mr. Caldwell, Westbrook Industries has prepared a preliminary assessment of your company's actual financial position, along with a proposed roadmap for stabilization." "Stabilization?" Andrew laughed bitterly. "You mean acquisition. You're using my wife to orchestrate a hostile takeover." "There's nothing hostile about it," I corrected him. "Especially when the alternative is watching the company your grandfather built collapse under the weight of financial mismanagement and potential regulatory penalties." The maitre d' approached discreetly, carrying a sealed envelope that he placed before me. "As requested, Mrs. Caldwell." I opened the envelope and quickly reviewed its contents before passing it to Michael, who nodded in confirmation. Perfect timing, as always. "What is that?" Andrew demanded, his earlier attempt at composure crumbling further. "Confirmation from Lakeside Bank," I replied calmly. "They've identified the accounts where our personal funds were transferred this afternoon. Interestingly, both accounts were opened just last week, one in your name only and another under a corporate entity registered to an address I believe you might recognize." I slid a printout across the table to Vanessa, whose face drained of color as she recognized her own address associated with the newly formed company. "Elite Marketing. Consultants LLC," I read aloud. "Formed 8 days ago with you listed as the principal, receiving a transfer of $175,000 from our joint accounts this afternoon." "Drew told me it was my signing bonus," she whispered, finally breaking her silence. "He said it was approved by the board as part of my promotion to marketing director." "The board approved no such position or bonus," Diana confirmed from the video screen. "In fact, the marketing department restructuring proposal hasn't even been presented for consideration yet." Andrew's eyes darted between Vanessa and the buy screen, the carefully constructed narrative he'd created beginning to collapse. "The funds are temporary," he insisted. "Part of a strategic reorganization I've been planning." "The strategic reorganization involving the lakefront property you put under contract last week," I interrupted, producing another document. "The one titled Drew and Vanessa's Lake. House in your personal files?" Andrew's face reddened. "You've been going through my personal documents?" "Actually, no," I corrected him. "The real estate agent who handled the transaction is the sister of our financial controller. When she realized company email was being used for correspondence about a personal property, she became concerned about potential ethics violations and brought it to Diana's attention." Diana nodded in confirmation. "Which led us to discover that the $50,000 earnest money deposit came from a Caldwell Manufacturing account normally used for capital improvements." "Company funds," Harold said gravely, "being used to purchase a personal vacation property without board knowledge or approval, while simultaneously draining your marital accounts. Can you explain that, son?" Andrew's shoulders sagged as the weight of evidence against him mounted. The maitre d' approached again, this time with a fresh bottle of wine that he presented to Michael. "I didn't order that," Andrew snapped, his frustration finding an easy target. "Compliments of Ms. Eleanor Westbrook," the maitre d' replied smoothly. "She sends her regards and looks forward to Monday's meeting." Andrew's head jerked up. "Eleanor Westbrook is involved in this?" Michael allowed himself a small smile as he approved the wine. "The CEO of Westbrook Industries takes a personal interest in acquisitions of this magnitude, especially when they involve correcting historical misunderstandings between our companies." I watched understanding dawn in Andrew's eyes. Eleanor Westbrook, the formidable CEO who had transformed her family's company from a regional player to an industry leader, was the granddaughter of the E.T. man Andrew's grandfather had supposedly forced out of business decades ago. The rivalry between Caldwell and Westbrook was legendary in Lakeside's business community, though few knew the full story. "Rebecca," Andrew's voice had taken on an almost pleading quality, "you can't hand Caldwell over to the Westbrooks after everything our families have." "After everything our families have what?" Harold interrupted sharply. "Tell me, Andrew, what do you know about the history between Caldwell and Westbrook?" Andrew hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Grandfather outmaneuvered Joseph Westbrook during the industry consolidation in the 60s. He was the better businessman." Harold shook his head, disappointment evident in his expression. "That's the story you chose to believe, isn't it? The convenient narrative of our family's superior business acumen?" I withdrew another document from my portfolio, this one older than the others, yellowed with age and carefully preserved. "Perhaps you should read the actual account," I suggested, sliding it across the table. Andrew stared at the document without touching it. What is this? A letter from your grandfather to Joseph Westbrook, dated 1975, I replied. Harold shared it with me years ago when he first asked me to join the board. Harold leaned closer to the camera. My father's greatest regret, Andrew, was how he handled the Westbrook situation. Joseph wasn't outmaneuvered. He was betrayed by his closest friend and business partner. Your grandfather used confidential information obtained through their friendship to secure contracts that should have been jointly pursued. Andrew looked genuinely confused, his worldview visibly shaken. But grandfather always said, my father told the story he needed to believe, Harold continued. But near the end of his life, he tried to make amends. Joseph refused his overtures. The rift between our families had grown too deep. That letter was his final attempt at reconciliation. Michael Turner nodded solemnly. My father worked for Joseph Westbrook during those years. He often spoke of how that betrayal changed him, made him more cautious, less trusting. The business survived, but something fundamental was lost. I watched Andrew carefully as this new information settled over him. The mythology of Caldwell's business superiority had been central to his identity, the story of his grandfather's brilliant strategy, a cornerstone of his corporate philosophy. Learning that this foundational narrative was built on betrayal rather than brilliance seemed to deflate him further. Which brings us to the present situation, I said quietly. Eleanor Westbrook has been watching Caldwell's operations with interest for years. Not out of competitive malice, but with a genuine concern for the legacy both our families have built in this community. When Rebecca approached me 6 months ago with her concerns about Caldwell's financial stability, Michael explained, Eleanor saw an opportunity not just for business expansion, but for historical reconciliation. Andrew's eyes narrowed suspiciously. 6 months ago? You've been planning this for half a year? I met his gaze steadily. I started documenting financial irregularities the moment I noticed them. At first, I thought you were simply making poor decisions under pressure. But when I discovered the personal nature of those irregularities, you went to our biggest competitor instead of coming to me, Andrew cut in bitterly. I tried coming to you, I reminded him. 3 separate attempts to discuss concerns about fund allocations, all dismissed as unnecessary worrying on my part. You told me to leave the business decisions to those who understand business. Remember? Through the video screen, I could see several board members exchanging glances. Andrew's dismissive attitude toward my financial expertise was well known, though few had been willing to challenge the CEO directly. The proposed acquisition isn't just about correcting financial mismanagement, Michael continued. It's about preserving jobs, maintaining client relationships, and ensuring that the Caldwell legacy continues in some form. As Rebecca has documented, without intervention, the company could face insolvency within 18 months. Vanessa, who had been silently following the conversation, suddenly stood. I think I should leave. Sit down, Andrew commanded, but without his usual authority. Actually, Diana interjected from the screen, Ms. Parker's presence might be useful as we discuss next steps, particularly regarding the potential recovery of misappropriated funds. I nodded agreement. Vanessa's testimony about how certain decisions were presented to her could prove valuable in distinguishing between misleading a colleague and deliberate fraud. Vanessa sank back into her chair, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. I didn't know about any of this, she insisted. Drew told me the position and compensation were completely legitimate, that the board had approved everything. Including the apartment? I asked quietly. The one on Riverside Avenue, leased by Caldwell Manufacturing, but not listed in any corporate housing documentation? Her silence was answer enough. The maître d'hôtel approached again, this time with the anniversary dessert I had arranged weeks ago, an elaborate creation featuring a miniature chocolate replica of the watch I had planned to give Andrew. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone at the table. I believe this concludes the preliminary discussion, Harold said from the screen. The board will convene formally on Monday morning at 8 a.m. Andrew, you are suspended from all operational duties effective immediately, pending full investigation. Rebecca, as the most informed about the financial situation, will serve as interim CEO until the acquisition details are finalized. Andrew's head snapped up. You're making Rebecca CEO? She's not even a Caldwell. No, Harold agreed, but she's acted more faithfully to the Caldwell legacy than you have. The interim position recognizes both her financial expertise and her commitment to preserving what can be salvaged from this situation. The screen went dark as the video conference ended, leaving us in momentary silence. Michael Turner began gathering his documents. I'll have the full acquisition proposal delivered to board members tomorrow morning. Rebecca, Eleanor would like to meet with you directly at 7 a.m. to review final details before the formal presentation. I nodded, the weight of responsibility settling over me. This wasn't just about exposing Andrew's betrayal anymore. It was about shepherding a 60-year-old company through its most significant transition while protecting employees whose livelihoods depended on its survival. You planned this entire evening, Andrew said quietly, the fight gone from his voice. The anniversary dinner, the documents, the video conference, all of it precisely timed. Yes, I acknowledged, though you provided the catalyst this afternoon when you emptied our accounts. I was going to tell you tonight, he offered weakly. Explain that it was temporary, just until the divorce. The divorce you hadn't yet discussed with me? I finished for him. The one you expected me to accept along with the generous terms your lawyers had prepared? Vanessa stood again, more decisively this time. I really should go. Ms. Parker, Michael called as she turned to leave. Westbrook Industries will be conducting interviews next week for those Caldwell employees who wish to transition to our company. Your marketing experience could be valuable, provided you're willing to cooperate fully with the financial investigation. The offer hung in the air, a potential lifeline for someone who suddenly found herself implicated in a corporate scandal, not entirely of her own making. After a moment of visible internal struggle, she nodded. I'll provide whatever information is needed. As Vanessa departed, Andrew and I were left alone with Michael. The remains of our anniversary dinner spread out between us like artifacts from another life. 18 years of marriage culminating in this moment of corporate and personal reckoning. Why? Andrew asked finally. You could have just filed for divorce when you discovered the affair. Why go to all this trouble? I considered the question carefully. Because this was never just about our marriage, Drew. It was about responsibility to your father, to the employees who depend on Caldwell for their livelihoods, to the legacy your grandfather tried to rectify at the end of his life. You betrayed all of that, not just me. The accounts, he said after a moment. The transfers this afternoon. I would have presented me with a fait accompli along with divorce papers. I finished for him, leaving me to fight through courts for years to recover what was rightfully mine, just as you've been doing with the company, draining its resources while maintaining the appearance of prosperity. Michael excused himself tactfully, stepping outside to take a call and giving us a moment of privacy. In the sudden quiet of the Sapphire Room, surrounded by the elegant anniversary decorations I had so carefully selected, Andrew looked diminished, the confident CEO persona stripped away to reveal someone I barely recognized. I did love you once, he said softly, an echo of another conversation from what felt like a lifetime ago. I know, I replied, surprised to find that I believed him. But you loved the idea of power more. The appearance of success became more important than the substance of integrity. Andrew stared at the anniversary dessert, still untouched at the center of the table. What happens now? Now, I said, gathering my documents and standing. You call your lawyer and explain that recovery of the transferred funds needs to happen immediately if you want any hope of leniency from the board. Then you prepare for Monday's meeting, where you'll face the consequences of actions that can't be undone with charm or misdirection. As I walked toward the door, Andrew called after me. "Rebecca, the watch. The one you mentioned earlier. My grandfather's watch. Was that real?" I paused, my hand on the door. "Yes, I spent months tracking down one identical to the one your grandfather gave your father when he turned the company over to him. I thought it would be symbolic, a reminder of the legacy you were carrying forward." I allowed myself a small, sad smile. Ironically, it still is symbolic, just not in the way I intended. Outside the harbor view, the night air felt cleansing, after the emotional intensity of the dining room. The city lights reflected off the lake, steady and constant despite the personal earthquake I had just navigated. My phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Westbrook confirming our morning meeting, followed immediately by one from Harold. "You did the right thing. Thank you for protecting what matters." I took a deep breath, feeling neither triumph nor despair, only a calm certainty that I had acted with the integrity that Andrew had abandoned. The Caldwell legacy would continue, though transformed. The company employees would retain their jobs. Harold would see his father's greatest regret addressed through the merger with Westbrook. And I would finally step fully into the leadership role I had been quietly preparing for throughout my years with Caldwell Manufacturing, not as the CEO's wife, but as a financial strategist with the vision to guide the company through its most significant transition. As I drove away from the harbor view, I thought about the long road that had led to this evening. The subtle dismissals of my expertise, the gradual isolation of Harold from company operations, the systematic misallocation of resources, all signs I had observed with increasing concern until they culminated in today's final betrayal. Andrew had always underestimated me, seeing only what he expected to see. A supportive wife whose financial acumen was a convenient background asset rather than a core strength. He had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, that my patience and precision weren't weaknesses but powerful tools I had honed through years of corporate finance work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the formal merger negotiations, employee transitions, regulatory filings. But tonight, as the anniversary dinner receded in my rearview mirror, I allowed myself a moment to acknowledge what I had accomplished. Not revenge in the traditional sense, but something more meaningful. Justice for a company that deserved better leadership, consequences for actions that had violated trust on every level, and a path forward that honored rather than exploited. The Caldwell legacy. Sometimes the most effective response to betrayal isn't dramatic confrontation, but methodical, precise action that creates consequences too significant to ignore. Andrew had emptied our accounts, thinking it would force me into accepting his terms. Instead, he had triggered the final phase of a corporate chess game I had been patiently playing for months. A game he hadn't even realized was in progress until checkmate was inevitable. The lakefront property Andrew had contracted for his new life with Vanessa would be sold. The funds returned to Caldwell Manufacturing's accounts. The elaborate future he had planned would evaporate like morning mist on the water, and the family business he had treated as a personal resource would transform into something stronger, more ethical, and ultimately more successful than his mismanagement would have allowed. As I pulled into my driveway, the home that Andrew would never return to, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. Not for the betrayal or the pain it had caused, but for the clarity it had provided. Without Andrew's actions forcing my hand, I might have continued trying to address problems from the sidelines, always deferring to the authority he had claimed, but failed to earn through integrity. Tomorrow, Eleanor Westbrook and I would begin, writing a new chapter for both our companies, one built on transparency, mutual respect, and the recognition that legacies matter not because of the names attached to them, but because of the values they represent. And that, perhaps, was the most fitting anniversary gift I could have received. Not the continuation of a marriage built on increasingly hollow promises, but the beginning of a future defined by the principles I had always valued. The morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of pristine autumn day that normally would have filled me with appreciation for Lakeside's natural beauty. Today, however, my focus was entirely on the meeting awaiting me at Westbrook Industries headquarters. I'd slept surprisingly well. The weight of secrets finally lifted after months of careful documentation and strategic planning. I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a charcoal gray suit that projected both authority and professionalism. The pearl necklace Harold had given me on my 10th anniversary with Andrew completed the ensemble, a reminder of the family connection that transcended my failed marriage. As I fastened it, I thought about Harold's message from the night before. "You did the right thing." 4 simple words that carried the validation I hadn't realized I needed. Westbrook's corporate offices occupied the top 3 floors of Lakeside's most prestigious business tower. Unlike Caldwell's dated headquarters with its wood paneling and traditional furnishings, Westbrook embraced a modern aesthetic of glass, steel, and artistic lighting. The contrast couldn't have been more striking, or more symbolic of the two companies' divergent paths. Eleanor Westbrook was already waiting when I arrived, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a panoramic view of the lake and, in the distance, the Caldwell Manufacturing facility. At 62, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob that framed strong features and alert eyes that missed nothing. "Rebecca," she greeted me, extending her hand. "Thank you for being exactly on time, a quality I've always appreciated." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct as she assessed me. I'd only met Eleanor once before, briefly at an industry function where Andrew had quickly steered me away, maintaining the artificial distance between our companies that 3 generations of rivalry had established. "Ms. Westbrook," I began, but she waved away the formality. "Eleanor, please, especially given what we're about to undertake together." She gestured toward a conference table where Michael Turner was already seated with several other executives. "Coffee before we dive in?" I accepted gratefully, the normalcy of the gesture helping to ground me after the emotional turbulence of the previous evening. As Eleanor poured from a carafe herself rather than delegating the task to an assistant, I noted the subtle message. Despite her position, she didn't stand on ceremony. "I imagine last night was difficult," she said quietly, handing me the cup. "Personal betrayal always cuts deeper than professional disappointment." I appreciated that she didn't offer platitudes or excessive sympathy. "It was necessary," I replied simply, "for the company and for myself." She nodded, understanding the distinction. "Michael has briefed me on the financial situation at Caldwell. It's worse than we suspected, but not beyond recovery with the, right leadership. Which is why I'm grateful for your willingness to pursue acquisition, rather than waiting for collapse and picking up the pieces," I acknowledged. Eleanor's expression turned thoughtful. "This isn't just about business opportunity, though of course that's a factor. There's a certain historical symmetry to reuniting these companies." She led me to the conference table where detailed acquisition proposals were already prepared, the Westbrook legal and financial teams clearly having worked through the night to finalize the documents. The thoroughness impressed me. This wasn't a hastily assembled opportunistic grab, but a carefully considered strategic integration. "We've structured the offer to address several key priorities," Michael explained as we took our seats. "Maintaining employment for Caldwell's workforce, preserving the Caldwell name through a branded division, and establishing the Caldwell Foundation to continue Harold's community initiatives." I reviewed the documents carefully, noting that many of my own recommendations had been incorporated. The valuation was fair given Caldwell's compromised financial position, and the transition timeline reasonable. Most importantly, the proposal included a specific role for me as Chief Financial Officer of the combined entity, acknowledging my expertise rather than treating me as merely Andrew's soon-to-be ex-wife. "There's something else I'd like to discuss." Eleanor said after I'd finished my initial review. "Something not included in these documents." She nodded to her team, who discreetly left the room, leaving only Eleanor, Michael, and myself. Once the door closed, Eleanor retrieved a leather portfolio from beside her chair. My grandfather kept meticulous records of his partnership with Edward Caldwell, including the events that led to their separation. She removed a bundle of letters, secured with a faded ribbon. These document a different history than the one that's been publicly told. I thought of the single letter Harold had shared with me years ago. Edward Caldwell's final attempt at reconciliation with his former partner. Harold mentioned that your grandfather refused his father's attempts to make amends. Eleanor nodded. Joseph Westbrook was a proud man who felt deeply betrayed. But what neither family fully understood was that the rift was orchestrated by a third party. She spread several yellowed documents across the table. Thomas Harrington, Edward's financial advisor, deliberately manipulated information flowing between the partners. He stood to gain significantly from their separation. I leaned forward, intrigued by this new piece of historical context. Harrington. The name sounds familiar. It should, Michael confirmed. Harrington Financial still exists. In fact, they've managed portions of Caldwell's investment portfolio for decades. The implications settled over me. Are you suggesting there's a connection to the current situation? Eleanor's expression was grave. Not directly, no. But there's a pattern worth noting. External financial advisors who prioritize their own interests over their clients. Family businesses vulnerable to manipulation when communication breaks down. Partnerships destroyed by misplaced trust. I considered this historical parallel to Andrew's current betrayal of the company. You believe understanding this history is important to the merger. I believe, Eleanor said carefully, that acknowledging the past helps us avoid repeating its mistakes. The rivalry between our families was built on a misunderstanding perpetuated for 3 generations. Your husband's recent actions have damaged Caldwell, but they've also created an opportunity to finally heal that original wound. Michael spread out a second set of documents, modern ones this time. We've taken the liberty of preparing an alternative proposal, one that structures this not as an acquisition, but as a true merger of equals, despite Caldwell's current financial disadvantages. I scanned the new terms with growing amazement. This approach would preserve more of Caldwell's identity and autonomy than I had dared hope for. This is remarkably generous given the circumstance. Eleanor smiled slightly. It's not entirely altruistic. Caldwell still has valuable patents, client relationships, and manufacturing capabilities that complement our own, and there's the matter of the personnel. You mean me, I said directly. Among others, she acknowledged. Your financial restructuring of Caldwell 10 years ago was brilliant work. Work that Andrew received most of the credit for if industry. Gossip is accurate. I didn't confirm or deny. The financial engineering that had saved Caldwell during the recession had indeed been my work, though Andrew had presented it to the industry as his strategic vision. What matters now, Eleanor continued, is moving forward with clear eyes about both our shared history and future potential. The merger announcement goes out at noon, immediately following the emergency board meeting at Caldwell. We need to be aligned on messaging and immediate priorities. For the next 2 hours, we refined the merger plan, focusing particularly on how to stabilize Caldwell's operations during the transition. Eleanor's grasp of both strategic vision and practical implementation impressed me. Unlike Andrew, who preferred grand pronouncements to detailed planning, she delved into specifics without losing sight of broader objectives. There's the matter of Andrew, Michael noted as we moved to governance issues. His legal position, as both CEO and significant shareholder, creates complications. I had anticipated this. Harold's medical certification provides grounds for invoking the emergency leadership provisions in Caldwell's bylaws. Andrew's suspension can be implemented immediately, but removing him from the board requires a shareholder vote. Which brings us to another sensitive topic, Eleanor said carefully. The funds Andrew transferred yesterday. Our legal team believes there are grounds for immediate freezing of those accounts, pending investigation of potential corporate financial misconduct. I've already begun that process, I confirmed. The bank has placed a temporary hold on both accounts based on evidence of potentially fraudulent transfers. But recovering the money is only part of the equation. There's also the question of what Andrew might do when confronted with the full board. Michael's expression turned serious. Our intelligence suggests he spent the night contacting allies. He's attempting to rally support before the emergency meeting. This didn't surprise me. Andrew had always excelled at relationship management, cultivating loyalty through a combination of charm and implied future benefits. Which board members? James Thornton and Peter Wilkins, Michael replied. Both golf partners of Andrew's who've historically supported his initiatives without much scrutiny. I nodded, having anticipated those exact names. They control about 20% of voting shares between them. Not enough to block the emergency measures, but sufficient to create complications for the merger if they remain opposed. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. You don't seem concerned. I'm not, I admitted, because James and Peter are ultimately pragmatists who care more about their investment than personal loyalty. Once they understand the financial reality Andrew has created, self-interest will override friendship. And you can convince them of that reality? Eleanor asked. I already have, I revealed, allowing myself a small smile. Last night, after leaving the harbor view, I sent each of them a confidential financial summary with documentation of the most serious irregularities. Their responses came in around midnight, both expressing shock and requesting private meetings before the board session. Michael looked impressed. You've been several steps ahead of everyone throughout this process. Not everyone, I corrected, nodding to Eleanor. I suspect Ms. Westbrook has been anticipating a Caldwell crisis for quite some time. Eleanor's eyes crinkled with amusement. Let's just say I recognize the pattern of Andrew's leadership from previous generations of Caldwell men. Charismatic, but ultimately more concerned with appearance than substance. She checked her watch. It's time. The Caldwell board meeting begins in 45 minutes. As we gathered our materials, Eleanor placed a hand lightly on my arm. Rebecca, are you prepared for how personal this will become? Andrew won't go quietly, and he knows your vulnerabilities better than anyone. The question gave me pause. Despite months of planning and the emotional confrontation of the previous evening, I hadn't fully considered how Andrew might retaliate when truly cornered. He'll try to paint me as a vindictive wife using corporate mechanisms for personal revenge, I acknowledged. He'll attempt to separate the financial misconduct from our marital issues to create doubt about my motives. And? Eleanor prompted gently. And he'll fail, I said with quiet certainty. Because the documentation speaks for itself. The numbers don't lie, even when people do. Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. Then let's proceed. The drive to Caldwell Manufacturing's headquarters was surreal. For 18 years, I had made this journey as Andrew's wife, later as a board member, but always in a supporting role despite my financial contributions to the company's success. Today, I arrived as interim CEO, the person responsible for guiding the company through its most significant transition since its founding. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly as I entered the lobby. News of last night's events had clearly spread, though the full details of the emergency board meeting remained confidential. Mrs. Caldwell, she greeted me, the familiar title, suddenly feeling strange. The board members are gathering in the main conference room. Thank you, Linda, and it's Rebecca, please. I corrected her gently. The symbolic importance of reclaiming my own identity separate from the Caldwell name wasn't lost on me, though the legal formalities of divorce remained ahead. The executive floor was unusually quiet as I made my way to the conference room. Diana Chen waited outside, a tablet in hand and concern evident in her expression. Andrew arrived 20 minutes ago, she informed me quietly. He's been making calls from his office. James Thornton and Peter Wilkins are already here, meeting, privately in the small conference room. I nodded, having expected this. And Harold? Connected remotely from Lakeside Estates, the nurse confirmed he's taken his medication and is fully alert for the meeting. Thank you, Diana. I squeezed her arm in appreciation. For everything. She returned the gesture, her expression softening momentarily. It wasn't just loyalty to the company, you know. Some of us have watched how he's treated you for years. The comment caught me off guard. I had always believed my marriage struggles remained private, my professional demeanor intact regardless of personal difficulties. Diana's words suggested a more transparent reality, that the respect I'd earned throughout the company had come with an awareness of the challenges I faced at home. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened and Andrew emerged. He'd clearly dressed for battle in his most expensive suit, his expression a carefully constructed mask of confident concern. The facade faltered slightly when he saw me standing with Diana, but he recovered quickly, approaching with the smooth ease that had charmed clients and colleagues for years. Rebecca, he nodded as if we were encountering each other at a routine business function rather than hours after his strategic betrayal had been exposed. I hope you've reconsidered last night's emotional reaction. There are reasonable explanations for everything. Diana stiffened beside me, but I remained calm. We'll discuss those explanations in the boardroom, Drew. The full documentation has been distributed to all members. The meeting begins in 10 minutes. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I wasn't engaging in a private confrontation. He had always preferred to handle disagreements behind closed doors where his persuasive talents could work without witnesses. This situation doesn't need to become adversarial, he attempted, lowering his voice. There's still a path forward that benefits everyone. I agree completely, I replied evenly. That's precisely what today's meeting will establish. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thornton and Wilkins understand that marital disputes shouldn't drive corporate decisions. They're concerned about the hasty nature of this emergency session. They're welcome to raise those concerns formally, I noted, along with their questions about the financial documentation they received last night. I'm particularly interested in their thoughts on the lakefront property purchase and the systematic misrepresentation of cash reserves. Andrew's confidence visibly faltered. He hadn't realized I'd already communicated with his presumed allies. Before he could respond, James Thornton and Peter Wilkins emerged from the small conference room, their expressions grave. Neither met Andrew's expectant gaze, instead nodding respectfully to me before proceeding to the main boardroom. "What did you do?" Andrew hissed once they were out of earshot. "I told them the truth," I replied simply. "Something you might consider trying. Today." I turned to follow the board members, but Andrew caught my arm, his fingers digging in just enough to communicate his desperation without leaving marks. "Rebecca, stop this now. You have no idea what you're doing to this company, to my family's legacy." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "I'm saving what's left of that legacy, Drew, which is more than I can say for what you've done with it." The boardroom fell silent as we entered separately. The large oval table that had hosted countless strategy sessions over the years now felt like a courtroom, with board members seated on one side and Andrew isolated on the other. The large screen at the front displayed a video feed of Harold, who looked more authoritative than I had seen him in years, the familiar Caldwell determination evident in his expression. Diana distributed final copies of the agenda and supporting documentation before taking her seat. As head of HR, she wasn't a voting board member, but her presence was essential given the personnel implications of today's decisions. The company's outside counsel, Martin Wright, joined via video conference, his serious expression suggesting he fully understood the gravity of the situation. "I call this emergency session of the Caldwell Manufacturing Board to order," Harold began formally. "Given the circumstances, I am invoking Section 7 of the corporate bylaws to temporarily resume the role of chairman for this meeting." Andrew immediately objected. "This session itself is procedurally questionable. I was given less than 12 hours' notice." Section 7(3) specifically provides for emergency sessions in cases of potential financial malfeasance with minimal notice requirements, Martin Wright interjected calmly. "The documentation provided meets the threshold for such emergency consideration." Harold continued as if the interruption hadn't occurred. "The board has received comprehensive documentation regarding financial irregularities under the current CEO's leadership. Additionally, we have before us a proposal from Westbrook Industries regarding a potential merger of our companies." "Peter," Wilkins cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. These allegations have emerged in the context of what appears to be a marital dispute between our CEO and another board member. We need to separate personal matters from corporate governance." It was the argument I had anticipated, perfectly delivered by one of Andrew's closest allies on the board. I remained silent, allowing Harold to respond. "The timing is certainly complicated," Harold acknowledged. "However, the financial documentation stands on its own merits, regardless of how it came to light. Martin, would you please address the legal implications of what's been discovered?" The corporate attorney adjusted his glasses, his expression somber. "Based on my preliminary review, there are at least 17 instances of potential securities violations, including material misrepresentation of the company's financial position to shareholders and misappropriation of corporate funds for personal use. These issues would exist regardless of any marital considerations." Andrew leaned forward, his expression darkening. "This is absurd. Every expenditure was properly authorized." "By you," I interjected calmly, speaking for the first time. "To yourself or to entities connected to Ms. Parker, without board knowledge or approval." James Thornton, who had been silently reviewing the documentation, looked up with evident concern. "Drew, the pattern here is difficult to dismiss. The vacation property alone raises serious red flags, but combined with the personnel changes and consulting contracts." He trailed off, uncomfortable completing the thought. "We're talking about routine business decisions being mischaracterized," Andrew insisted. "Rebecca has manipulated information to support her narrative because she discovered my relationship with Vanessa. This is personal vendetta dressed up as corporate concern. I had expected this exact approach, attempting to reduce serious financial misconduct to a matter of marital jealousy. Rather than defending myself, I simply opened the financial records to the marked sections. Page 37 details the systematic withdrawal of cash reserves that were reported as intact in quarterly statements to shareholders," I noted professionally. Page 42 shows the creation of shell companies registered to Ms. Parker's address that received consulting contracts without competitive bidding. Page 58 contains the property purchase agreement for a lakefront home, funded partially through corporate accounts designated for capital improvements. Harold's voice cut through the tension. "The question before this board isn't about personal relationships. It's about fiduciary responsibility and the survival of this company. The financial position Andrew has reported to us repeatedly over the past year bears little resemblance to reality. Our cash reserves are depleted, our debt has increased by 40%, and we've lost key personnel while adding positions that appear to serve personal rather than corporate interests." Martin Wright nodded gravely. "These discrepancies create significant legal exposure for both the company and individual board members who approve decisions based on misleading information. The weight of potential personal liability visibly impacted the board members. Corporate directors could face significant consequences for failing in their oversight duties, particularly when presented with clear evidence of malfeasance. In light of these concerns, Harold continued, I move for the immediate suspension of Andrew Caldwell from all operational roles pending full investigation, and the appointment of Rebecca Mitchell as interim CEO to oversee operations during this critical period. Andrew surged to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't seriously consider putting my wife in charge during divorce proceedings. The conflict of interest is less significant than your own, James Thornton interrupted. Surprising everyone. Rebecca's financial expertise is well established, and unlike you, she doesn't appear to have used her position for personal enrichment. The room fell silent as Andrew absorbed this betrayal from his presumed ally. His gaze darted around the table, searching for any supportive face and finding none. There's also the matter of the Westbrook proposal, Harold continued steadily, which offers the most viable path forward given our actual financial position. You're selling to Westbrook? Andrew's voice cracked with genuine shock. After three generations of mythology about competition that was actually based on a personal betrayal, Harold corrected firmly. Eleanor Westbrook has proposed terms that are remarkably generous given our compromised position. Terms that protect our employees, our name, and what remains of our legacy. I watched Andrew carefully as the full implications washed over him. This wasn't just about losing his position or even the company. It was about the collapse of the narrative he had constructed around himself as the brilliant third-generation leader of a family dynasty. The merger with Westbrook represented not just corporate restructuring, but the final dismantling of the story he had told himself about his place in the world. This can't be happening, he murmured, more to himself than the room. It already has, Harold replied quietly. The question now is whether you'll face these consequences with the dignity this company deserves, or force us to pursue more public and damaging remedies. As the formal vote proceeded, unanimous in favor of Andrew's suspension and my appointment as interim CEO, I felt no triumph, only a deep resolve to protect what could be salvaged from the situation. The Caldwell legacy deserved better than Andrew's betrayal, and the employees whose livelihoods depended on the company deserved leadership that prioritized their futures over personal gratification. When the merger proposal came to vote, even James Thornton and Peter Wilkins voted in favor, their financial self-interest finally overriding personal loyalty to Andrew. The path forward was clear, if challenging: a careful integration of two companies with complicated histories but potentially complementary futures. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Andrew remained seated, staring at the table as if still processing the completeness of his defeat. I gathered my documents, preparing to meet with the executive team to begin transition planning. When his voice stopped me, "Was any of it real?" he asked quietly. "Us. Our marriage. Or was I just a means to an end for you too?" The question caught me off guard with its unexpected vulnerability. For a moment, I saw past the corporate mask to the man I had once loved, before ambition and entitlement had corrupted him. "It was real," I answered honestly. "But somewhere along the way, you decided that appearance mattered more than substance. That seeming successful was more important than acting with integrity. I don't know exactly when you changed, Drew, but you did. And all of this," I gestured to the boardroom where his professional life had just imploded, "is the natural consequence of those choices." He looked up finally, his expression a complex mixture of anger, regret, and something that might have been respect. "You outplayed me completely. I never saw it coming. That's because you stopped seeing me." "Years ago," I replied simply, "you saw what you expected to see: a supportive wife, a useful board member, someone who would never challenge your authority. You forgot that I built my career analyzing financial patterns and identifying strategic weaknesses. I moved toward the door, but paused with my hand on the handle. The bank will be releasing the hold on our personal accounts tomorrow once the formal documentation is filed. The funds will be returned. The same can't be said for your position here. As I walked away from the boardroom toward my new temporary office, ironically, Andrew's former space, I felt the weight of responsibility settling firmly on my shoulders. The next few months would require every bit of financial and leadership skill I possessed to navigate the merger successfully. But for the first time in years, I was being valued for exactly those skills, not despite them. Diana was waiting outside the CEO's office, a stack of transition documents in hand and a small smile on her face. "Your new business cards are already ordered," she informed me. "And Eleanor Westbrook called. The press announcement is prepared pending your final approval." I nodded, accepting both the practical details and the symbolic weight they carried. "Thank you, Diana. Let's get started. We have a company to rebuild." As I stepped into the office that would be mine until the merger completion, I noticed Harold had arranged for his father's original company founding documents to be displayed prominently on the wall, a reminder of the legacy I was now tasked with preserving in a new form. The papers were slightly yellowed with age but still clearly legible, the founding principles of quality, integrity, and community responsibility laid out in Edward Caldwell's confident handwriting. Principles that his grandson had abandoned, but that would now guide the company's transition into its next chapter. Not an ending, as Andrew had characterized it, but a transformation that honored the past while creating a more sustainable future. Sometimes, I reflected as I took my seat at the desk, the perfect response to betrayal isn't revenge, but renewal, building, something better from the broken pieces left behind. The morning of the merger announcement dawned with unexpected clarity. For the first time in months, I woke without the weight of secrets pressing against my chest. The king-sized bed felt cavernous now, but there was something freeing about, stretching across the empty space, claiming territory that had always been negotiated. I allowed myself exactly 15 minutes to linger with these thoughts before rising to prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most scrutinized day of my professional life. The executive team meeting was scheduled for 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes. Before the official press release would go live announcing the Caldwell-Westbrook merger, by 8:15, business news networks would be dissecting every aspect of the deal, and by 9:00, I would be standing beside Eleanor Westbrook at a joint press conference, presenting a united front to employees, shareholders, and the business community that had watched our companies compete for generations. I selected a navy blue suit that projected confidence without ostentation, pearl earrings that had been a gift from my grandmother, and the simple gold wedding band I hadn't yet removed. That particular decision wasn't emotional, but strategic. Today needed to be about business continuity, not personal drama. The ring would come off when the merger was secure, not a moment before. Caldwell Manufacturing's headquarters was already buzzing with nervous energy when I arrived. Security had been enhanced in anticipation of media presence, and the reception area had been transformed with signage featuring both company logos side by side for the first time in history. Diana Chen met me at the elevator, tablet in hand, and expression carefully neutral. "The executive floor is secure," she reported as we walked briskly toward the conference room. Andrew attempted to enter earlier, but was escorted out by security as per the board's directive. I nodded, having anticipated this. How did he respond? Threatened legal action, mentioned speaking with reporters, nothing we haven't prepared for. She hesitated before adding, "Vanessa Parker has submitted her formal resignation, effective immediately. She's also provided a written statement confirming Andrew's role in her hiring and promotion." This was an unexpected development. One that would strengthen our position if Andrew pursued litigation, but also potentially complicated the narrative around the merger. Make sure legal has her contact information. We may need her testimony if this escalates. The conference room fell silent as I entered. 8 department heads sat around the table, their expressions ranging from apprehension to barely concealed relief. These were the people who would be instrumental in making the transition successful, or who could sabotage it through passive resistance if they felt threatened by the changes ahead. "Good morning," I began, taking the seat at the head of the table that had been Andrew's for the past decade. "I know you've all received the preliminary briefing about today's announcement. What you haven't yet heard are the specifics of how this merger will affect your departments and your roles going forward." For the next 40 minutes, I outlined the integration plan that Eleanor and I had finalized the previous day. Unlike typical acquisitions where redundancies immediately led to layoffs, the Caldwell-Westbrook merger had been specifically structured to leverage complementary strengths while minimizing disruption. Manufacturing operations will remain separate for at least 18 months, I explained, addressing the Chief Operations Officer's evident concern. Westbrook's focus on precision components and our expertise in integrated systems create natural synergies without immediate overlap. The tension in the room gradually eased as each executive received clear information about their department's future. By the time Michael Turner arrived to join us for the final preparations, the initial shock had transformed into cautious optimism among most of the leadership team. "The press release goes live in 10 minutes, Michael announced. "Stock trading in both companies has been temporarily halted pending the announcement. We expect significant market reaction when trading resumes." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "All systems go on our end. See you at the press conference. This is history in the making." I dismissed the executives to prepare their departmental communications, retaining only Thomas Harris, our Chief Communications Officer, to finalize the employee announcement that would go out simultaneously with the press release. "One thing," Thomas said hesitantly as we reviewed the message. "There are already rumors circulating about Andrew's personal situation being connected to his removal. How do you want to address questions about that?" It was the issue I'd been anticipating since the board meeting. The business press would inevitably connect Andrew's suspension to our marital situation, potentially undermining the legitimate financial concerns that had necessitated the leadership change. "We maintain absolute focus on the governance and financial aspects," I instructed. "If pressed directly, we acknowledge that personal matters are private, but that Andrew's removal was based entirely on documented financial irregularities, reviewed and acted upon by the full board." Thomas nodded, clearly relieved to have a clear directive. "And if Andrew speaks to the press himself? He's already contacted several business reporters requesting interviews." "Then we let the documentation speak for itself," I replied calmly. "Every allegation he makes can be countered with financial records that tell the true story." My phone buzzed again, this time with an alert that the press release had gone live. Within seconds, notifications began flooding in from business news outlets, industry analysts, and financial reporters, all seeking comment on the unexpected merger. On the large monitor mounted on the conference room wall, a financial news channel was already displaying breaking news graphics with both company logos. This morning's surprise announcement of a merger between longtime rivals Caldwell Manufacturing and Westbrook Industries has sent shockwaves through the industrial sector, the commentator was saying. The deal, valued at approximately $150 million, comes amid unconfirmed reports of financial irregularities at Caldwell and the abrupt removal of CEO Andrew Caldwell yesterday evening. Thomas muted the broadcast as Michael Turner rejoined us. "Markets reacting exactly as expected," he reported. Westbrook shares up 7% in pre-market trading on the acquisition news. Caldwell trading is still halted, but will resume after the press conference. I checked my watch, 40 minutes until I would need to face the assembled media alongside Eleanor. "Let's head downstairs. I want to speak with the executive assistants before they're bombarded with calls." The administrative staff had gathered in the large conference room on the second floor, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. These were the people who kept Caldwell functioning day to day, managing schedules, handling client, communications, and often serving as the first line of contact with the outside world. Their support would be crucial in the coming transition. I know this morning's announcement comes as a shock to many of you, I began, making eye contact with each person in the room. For generations, the names Caldwell and Westbrook have been positioned as rivals. Today, that changes. What doesn't change is our commitment to the employees who have built this company. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined the practical aspects of the merger that would most directly affect their work: updated email signatures, revised company letterhead, new reporting structures that would be phased in gradually. The simple, concrete details seemed to reassure them more than abstract promises about synergies or market position. One more thing, I added as our time drew to a close. You'll likely receive calls from people seeking information about Andrew's personal and professional situation. All such inquiries should be directed to the communications department without comment. This isn't about controlling the narrative. It's about ensuring that private matters remain private while we focus on the company's future. As the group dispersed, Margaret Winters, who had been Harold's executive assistant for over 20 years before transitioning to support Andrew, lingered behind. In her mid-60s, with impeccable silver hair and a piercing gaze that missed nothing, Margaret had been a steady presence through multiple leadership transitions. "A moment, Rebecca?" she requested quietly. I nodded, sensing she had something important to share. Margaret had always maintained professional boundaries, but her institutional knowledge made her an invaluable resource. "Harold asked me to give you this before the press conference," she said, handing me a small velvet box. "It belonged to Edward Caldwell, the company's founder. Harold thought you should be the one to wear it today." Inside the box was a simple, silver pin bearing the original Caldwell Manufacturing logo, a stylized C intertwined with an M, that Edward had designed himself in 1962. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Harold was publicly acknowledging that I, not his son, was the true steward of the Caldwell legacy during this crucial transition. "Please thank him for me," I said, carefully affixing the pin to my lapel. "And Margaret, thank you for your discretion throughout all of this. I know you must have observed concerning patterns long before they came to light." A shadow passed over her face. More than I care to remember. Andrew changed over the years. Not suddenly, but gradually. The young man who once sought his father's approval in all things became someone who resented any oversight or questioning. She hesitated before adding, "Harold will be watching the press conference from Lakeside Estates. He wanted me to tell you he's proud of how you've handled this situation." The unexpected personal message caught me off guard. Throughout my years with the Caldwell family, Harold had been consistently supportive but rarely demonstrative. His explicit approval, now at this pivotal moment, meant more than I had anticipated. Security personnel escorted me through a private entrance to the company auditorium, where the press conference would be held. Through the side door, I could see the room had filled to capacity with reporters, cameras, and recording equipment. At the back, a group of Caldwell employees had gathered, their expressions solemn as they awaited clarification about their professional futures. Eleanor Westbrook was waiting in the small preparation room adjacent to the stage, reviewing her notes with the composed focus that had built her reputation as one of the industry's most effective leaders. She looked up as I entered, her gaze immediately going to the silver pin on my lapel. "Edward's pin," she noted with quiet approval. "Harold made the right choice." "You recognize it?" I asked, surprised by her immediate identification of the heirloom. A slight smile softened her features. "My grandfather had a photograph of Edward wearing it at the opening of the original factory. Despite everything that happened between them, he kept that picture in his office until the day he died." She straightened her own jacket, a deep burgundy that complemented Westbrook's corporate colors. "Are you ready for this?" Once we step on that stage, there's no going back. I've been preparing for this day for months, I replied honestly, though I didn't know exactly what form it would take. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. When you first approached Michael with your concerns about Caldwell's finances, did you envision this outcome? The question made me pause. Those initial meetings with Michael Turner had been motivated by genuine concern for the company's stability, not by any desire for personal advancement or revenge. No, I admitted. I was simply trying to protect the company from Andrew's increasingly reckless decisions. The merger evolved as the most viable solution once the full extent of the financial situation became clear. She nodded, seeming satisfied with my response. That's why this will succeed where other mergers fail. It's being driven by necessity and opportunity, not ego or abstract market theories. She checked her watch. It's time. As we stepped onto the stage together, the flashes of cameras created a momentary disorientation. The assembled press fell silent, pens poised and cameras focused on this unprecedented moment. The leaders of Caldwell and Westbrook united after 60 years of corporate rivalry. Eleanor spoke first, her clear voice carrying easily through the auditorium as she outlined the strategic rationale for the merger, emphasizing complementary capabilities and market expansion opportunities. Her presentation was masterful, acknowledging the historical significance of the moment while focusing primarily on the future potential of the combined entity. When she introduced me as the interim CEO of Caldwell, who would be transitioning to Chief Financial Officer of the merged company, a ripple of whispers spread through the media section. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the personal drama behind the corporate restructuring. I stepped to the microphone, conscious of the weight of Edward Caldwell's pin on my lapel and what it represented. Thank you, Eleanor. Today marks not just a new chapter for our companies, but a recommitment to the founding principles that built them: integrity, innovation, and community responsibility. For the next 10 minutes, I detailed the financial and operational aspects of the merger, deliberately focusing on employee continuity, client benefits, and shareholder value. I made no mention of Andrew or the circumstances that had precipitated these events, maintaining the professional focus we had agreed upon. It wasn't until the question and answer session that the personal dimensions inevitably surfaced. A reporter from the Financial Times rose first. Mrs. Caldwell, or do you prefer Ms. Mitchell? Can you address the rumors that your husband's removal as CEO is connected to your marital situation rather than legitimate business concerns? The directness of the question created a momentary hush in the room. All eyes were on me, waiting to see if personal emotion would crack the professional veneer I had maintained throughout the presentation. I prefer Ms. Mitchell, I replied evenly. And I can state unequivocally that the board's decision to suspend Andrew Caldwell was based entirely on documented financial irregularities that have been independently verified by outside auditors. The board's fiduciary responsibility to shareholders necessitated immediate action once these issues came to light. Another reporter jumped in before I had finished. But isn't it true that you're currently in divorce proceedings? How can shareholders be confident this isn't a case of personal vendetta influencing corporate decisions? Eleanor stepped smoothly to the microphone before I could respond. Perhaps I can address that question, since I have no personal connection to the situation. Westbrook Industries conducted extensive due diligence before proposing this merger. The financial issues at Caldwell Manufacturing are real, significant, and thoroughly documented. Our offer reflects a fair valuation based on those realities, not on any personal dynamics between individuals. Her intervention shifted the momentum, redirecting attention back to the business fundamentals. For the next 20 minutes, we fielded questions about integration timelines, potential synergies, and market positioning, exactly the substantive issues we had hoped would dominate the discussion. As the press conference concluded and we moved Toward the exit, a commotion at the back of the auditorium drew everyone's attention. Andrew had entered, impeccably dressed in his most expensive suit, with his attorney beside him. The reporters immediately swiveled their cameras, sensing the dramatic confrontation they had been hoping for. "I have a statement regarding today's announcement," Andrew called out, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. Eleanor and I exchanged glances, both recognizing the precarious moment. Engaging directly would create exactly the spectacle Andrew was hoping for. Ignoring him completely might appear evasive to the assembled press. "Perhaps Mr. Caldwell would like to submit his statement through the proper channels," Eleanor suggested smoothly into the microphone. "Today's press conference is specifically addressing the merger structure and transition plan." Andrew stepped forward, undeterred. "As the CEO of Caldwell Manufacturing," former CEO, called out a voice from the employee section, drawing nervous laughter from the crowd. Andrew's face flushed with anger at the interruption, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering something urgent in his ear. After a tense moment, Andrew nodded curtly and turned to address the reporters directly. "I'll be holding my own press conference at 2 p.m. at the offices of Harrington and Associates to address the unauthorized actions taken by the board and the circumstances surrounding this so-called merger." With that, he turned and exited, his attorney hurrying to keep pace. The room erupted with questions, but Eleanor calmly raised her hand for silence. "We have nothing further to add at this time. Detailed information packets are available from the communications team, and both Ms. Mitchell and I will be available for individual interviews later this afternoon. Thank you for your attention." As we made our way back to the preparation room, I could feel the tension in my shoulders beginning to build. Andrew's planned counter-press conference presented a new complication, one we had anticipated but hoped to avoid. "Harrington and Associates," Eleanor mused once we were alone. "Interesting choice." The significance wasn't lost on me. Thomas Harrington had been the financial advisor who had manipulated the original rift between Edward Caldwell and Joseph Westbrook. The modern firm that bore his name had continued to manage portions of Caldwell's investments for decades. He's deliberately invoking the historical rivalry, while simultaneously aligning himself with the firm that has the most to lose from our merger, Eleanor noted. Harrington has been earning significant fees from managing Caldwell's pension funds for years, funds that will likely be consolidated under Westbrook's financial management after the merger. Michael Turner joined us, having monitored market reactions from a separate room during the press conference. Caldwell stock reopened down 12%, but has stabilized at -8%, better than projected given the financial revelations. Westbrook is holding steady at +6%. The market is responding rationally to the merger fundamentals rather than the personal drama. "For now," I cautioned. "Andrew's press conference this afternoon could introduce new volatility if he makes specific allegations about the company's financial position or the merger process." Eleanor's expression remained composed, but I could see the strategic calculation behind her eyes. "Perhaps we should ensure the market has access to the complete financial documentation before he speaks. Full transparency would make any mischaracterization on his part immediately verifiable." I nodded, appreciating the elegant simplicity of the approach. "Diana is preparing the comprehensive disclosure package now. We can accelerate the release to coincide with the lunch break financial news cycle, 2 hours before Andrew's scheduled appearance." "Do it," Eleanor decided. "And Rebecca, I think you should consider joining Harold at Lakeside Estates during Andrew's press conference. Your presence there, supporting the company founder while his son attempts to undermine the merger, would send a powerful message without requiring you to engage directly in a public confrontation." The suggestion made strategic sense. Harold's moral authority within the company remained unquestioned, and his explicit support for the merger had been a crucial factor in employee acceptance of the dramatic change. being seen at his side during Andrew's counter-narrative would reinforce the continuity of Caldwell's true legacy without descending into personal recriminations. "I'll arrange it," I agreed, reaching for my phone to message Diana about both the accelerated financial disclosure and my afternoon plans. As the initial adrenaline of the press conference began to fade, I found myself reflecting on the strange trajectory that had brought me to this moment. 18 years ago, I had been a rising star in corporate finance, taking a calculated risk by joining my husband's family business rather than pursuing my own independent career path. That decision, which had once seemed like a compromise, had ultimately positioned me to protect the very company I had adopted as my own. Eleanor seemed to sense my momentary introspection. "Second thoughts?" she asked quietly. "Not about the merger," I clarified. "Just contemplating how thoroughly life upends our expectations. I never imagined standing here as the interim CEO negotiating Caldwell's future without Andrew." She studied me with the perceptive gaze that had made her such a formidable business leader. "When this settles, and it will, you'll need to decide what comes next for you personally. The CFO position is yours as planned, but I suspect you might want something different after experiencing the CEO role, brief though it may be." The observation caught me off guard. I had been so focused on navigating the immediate crisis that I hadn't seriously considered my own professional future beyond the planned transition. "One challenge at a time," I replied with a small smile. "For now, let's make sure Andrew's afternoon performance doesn't derail what we've set in motion." But as I gathered my materials and prepared to leave for Lakeside Estates, Eleanor's question lingered. What did I want for myself once the merger was complete and my role as protective steward of Caldwell Manufacturing concluded? For 18 years, my identity had been inextricably linked to the Caldwell name, professionally and personally. That chapter was ending, but the next remained unwritten. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished brass panel, professional, composed, and prominently displaying Edward Caldwell's pin on my lapel. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, one thing was clear. I had earned my place in Caldwell's legacy not through marriage, but through the same qualities that had built the company from the beginning: integrity, determination, and the courage to make difficult decisions when necessary. The elevator doors opened to the lobby where Diana waited with an update on the financial disclosure package and transportation arrangements to Lakeside Estates. The next phase of this corporate chess match was about to begin, and despite Andrew's desperate countermove, the outcome was already determined. Sometimes the most effective response to betrayal isn't dramatic confrontation, but methodical, strategic action that creates consequences too significant to overcome. Andrew had emptied our accounts, thinking it would force me into accepting his terms. Instead, he had triggered a sequence of events that would reshape not just our personal lives, but the entire corporate landscape of Lakeside. As I stepped into the waiting car, I touched the silver pin once more. A tangible reminder that legacies aren't defined by names but by actions, and some betrayals, however painful, ultimately lead to necessary transformations. Lakeside Estates carried none of the sterile institutional atmosphere I had feared when Andrew first suggested moving Harold there 18 months ago. Instead, the sprawling facility with its manicured gardens and comfortable private residences felt more like an exclusive country club than a care center. Harold's suite occupied a prime corner position with panoramic views of the lake that had given our city its name. As I approached his door, I could hear the financial news playing inside, coverage of the morning's press conference still dominating the business headlines. Harold's nurse, Elaine, greeted me with a warm smile that couldn't quite hide her curiosity about the day's dramatic events. "He's been watching the news since 6 this morning," she informed me, lowering her voice. "I haven't seen him this energized in months." Harold rose from his armchair as I entered, moving with a vigor that belied his 75 years. The television displayed side-by-side images of Eleanor and me at the podium, with scrolling market data beneath, showing the real-time reactions to our announcement. "There she is," Harold declared, his voice stronger than I had heard it in recent memory. "The woman who saved Caldwell Manufacturing from my son's recklessness." The unvarnished assessment of Andrew's actions coming from his own father still carried the power to surprise me despite everything we had uncovered together over the past months. Harold had always been measured in his criticism, carefully, separating Andrew's business decisions from personal judgment. "The merger will protect what matters most," I responded, accepting his brief embrace. "The employees, the community commitments, the innovation pipeline you've always prioritized." Harold gestured for me to take the seat opposite his, muting the television with a practiced motion. "I watched your press conference, masterful handling of those personal questions, dignified, focused on business fundamentals." His eyes twinkled with unexpected humor. And then my son made his dramatic entrance, right on cue. Always did have a flair for theatrical timing, even as a boy. Despite everything, the affection in Harold's voice when he spoke of Andrew's childhood traits reminded me that beneath the corporate drama lay a family story with decades of complex history. Whatever Andrew had become, he remained Harold's only son. "His counter-press conference is scheduled for 2 o'clock, I explained, checking my watch. "Eleanor suggested I should be here with you when it airs, presenting a united front without engaging directly in any personal conflict." Harold nodded approvingly. Eleanor Westbrook always did understand the power of symbolism. Joseph's granddaughter has his strategic mind with none of his stubbornness. He studied me for a moment before adding, "You're still wearing your wedding ring." The observation was stated as fact, without judgment or question. I glanced down at the simple gold band that had adorned my left hand for 18 years. "For now," I acknowledged, "today needed to be about business continuity, not personal drama. The ring comes off when the merger is secure." "Practical as always," Harold noted with a hint of admiration. "One of the qualities I recognized in you from the beginning, the ability to separate emotion from strategy when necessary." He reached for a folder on the side table, removing several documents that I recognized as the merger agreement summary. "Now, talk me through the integration timeline. I want to understand exactly how this transition will unfold." For the next hour, Harold and I discussed the detailed plans for combining the two companies. Despite his semi-retired status, his grasp of operational complexities remained sharp, his questions revealing insights that even Eleanor's thorough due diligence team had occasionally overlooked. This was the Harold Caldwell who had guided the company through 3 recessions and numerous market disruptions, analytical, forward-thinking, and unwavering in his commitment to the business his father had founded. As we finished reviewing the manufacturing integration plan, Elaine appeared with lunch and a meaningful glance toward the clock. Andrew's press conference would begin in 30 minutes. "I've had the chef prepare something special," Harold announced as Elaine arranged the table. A small celebration seemed appropriate. The something special turned out to be an elegant recreation of the meal Harold and I had shared the first time he had invited me to discuss joining Caldwell Manufacturing's finance department: grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, and wild rice. Pilaf. The attention to detail was touching, a reminder of how carefully Harold observed and remembered the significant moments in others' lives. "You recognized something in me back then," I reflected, accepting the glass of white wine he offered, something Andrew often missed. Harold considered this as he served the food. Andrew has always been drawn to surface qualities: charm, social ease, the appearance of success. I saw in you something different: substance, careful analysis, the patience to build something lasting. He raised his glass in a toast to the qualities that truly matter in both business and life. As we ate, the television remained muted but visible, the financial news ticker continuing to track market reactions to the merger announcement. Caldwell stock had stabilized at its new lower valuation, a reflection of the company's actual financial position rather than the inflated picture Andrew had maintained. Westbrook shares continued their modest gains, the market apparently approving of their strategic acquisition. At precisely 2 o'clock, the screen changed to show the ornate conference room at Harrington & Associates, where Andrew stood at a podium flanked by his attorney and Thomas Harrington himself, the current head of the financial firm his grandfather had founded. The staging was deliberate, presenting Andrew as the rightful business leader supported by established financial expertise. Harold unmuted the television as Andrew began speaking, his voice carrying the practiced confidence that had served him well in client presentations and shareholder meetings over the years. This morning, you witnessed what I can only describe as a corporate coup, orchestrated by my estranged wife in collaboration with our longtime industry rival, Andrew began, his tone suggesting reasonable concern rather than personal grievance. While personal matters should remain private, I feel compelled to address the dangerous precedent being set when marital disputes are allowed to influence major corporate decisions. The camera cut briefly to Thomas Harrington, who nodded gravely in apparent agreement with this assessment. The visual reinforcement wasn't subtle. Harrington's firm represented old money financial establishment, lending credibility to Andrew's narrative. The so-called financial irregularities being used to justify my removal are, in fact, standard business practices that have been mischaracterized to support a predetermined outcome, Andrew continued. Every expenditure was properly authorized within my discretion as CEO, every investment made with the company's long-term growth in mind. Harold made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snort. Standard business practices? Using company funds to purchase a vacation property with his mistress is now standard practice in corporate America? I seem to have missed that development. On screen, Andrew shifted to attack mode, his expression hardening. What shareholders should be asking is why Caldwell Manufacturing is being sold to our main competitor at a substantial discount to its true value. Why this transaction is being rushed through without proper market testing or consideration of alternative partners. And why my wife, who stands to benefit personally from this arrangement through her new executive position, was allowed to participate in board deliberations despite her obvious conflict of interest. The allegations were precisely calibrated to raise governance concerns without delving into the specific financial issues that had prompted the board's action. It was the approach we had anticipated, attempting to reframe the situation as a procedural impropriety rather than responding to the substantive financial mismanagement. He's avoiding any specific numbers, I noted, watching Andrew's careful navigation around the documented irregularities. Smart of him, given that we released the complete financial disclosure package an hour ago. Harold nodded, his expression a mixture of professional assessment and personal disappointment. He knows he can't dispute the financial facts, so he's attacking the process instead. Classic misdirection. The press conference continued with Andrew introducing his attorney, who outlined the legal challenges they plan to pursue against both the board's emergency actions and the proposed merger itself. The threats sounded imposing, but lacked specific grounds that would survive preliminary legal scrutiny. This is about preserving a family legacy, Andrew declared as he retook the podium for his closing statement. Caldwell Manufacturing has been a cornerstone of this community for 60 years. Built by my grandfather and father through dedication and principled leadership. That legacy deserves better than to be dismantled through hasty decisions driven by personal animus rather than sound business judgment. At this invocation of family legacy, Harold leaned forward, his expression darkening. "How dare he?" he murmured, more to himself than to me. How dare he speak of legacy while systematically undermining everything his grandfather built? The camera briefly showed the assembled reporters, several of whom appeared skeptical of Andrew's narrative. One financial journalist could be seen checking information on her tablet, likely comparing Andrew's statements against the detailed financial disclosures we had released earlier. As the first questions began, focusing predictably on the personal aspects of the situation, Harold muted the television again. "I've heard enough," he declared, rising from his chair with sudden decision. "It's time to end this charade." I looked at him in surprise. "What are you planning?" "Something I should have done months ago," he replied, moving to his desk and removing his personal laptop. "When my son first began showing signs of financial recklessness, I started keeping records, notes, observations, copies of concerning documents. I told myself it was precautionary, that he was just finding his way as CEO. His expression reflected regret, tinged with resolve. I was protecting him at the expense of the company. That ends today." Harold opened his email and began composing a message with remarkable speed for someone his age. "I'm sending a personal statement to the Lakeside Business Journal addressing Andrew's allegations directly. As founder's son and chairman emeritus, my perspective carries weight that neither Andrew nor Harrington can easily dismiss." I watched as he drafted a clear, unequivocal statement supporting the board's actions and the merger deal, specifically refuting Andrew's claims about legacy protection. His words were measured but firm, the voice of institutional authority directly, contradicting his son's narrative. "Are you certain about this?" I asked quietly, recognizing the finality of such a public break. "Once this is published, there's no walking it back." Harold paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Rebecca, I've spent the past 18 months watching from the sidelines as my son dismantled 60 years of ethical business practices. I allowed myself to be gradually isolated from company operations under the guise of health concerns that were greatly exaggerated. I failed to intervene decisively when I first saw the warning signs." He looked up, his gaze steady and clear. "I won't fail again by remaining silent now." With that, he completed the message and pressed send, the simple action carrying the weight of both professional judgment and paternal heartbreak. The statement would likely be published within the hour, effectively ending any momentum Andrew might generate through his press conference. "It's done," Harold said simply, closing his laptop. "Now we focus on the future." We returned our attention to the television, where Andrew was now fielding increasingly skeptical questions from the financial press. One reporter was directly referencing the detailed financial package we had released, asking pointed questions about specific discrepancies between reported cash reserves and actual available funds. Andrew's confident facade was beginning to crack under the pressure of factual challenges he couldn't easily deflect. "He's realizing that his narrative isn't taking hold," I observed as Andrew became visibly defensive, interrupting a reporter, who was quoting directly from the audited financial statements. Harold nodded, a certain calmness settling over him now that he had taken definitive action. "The truth has a way of asserting itself, especially when backed by documented evidence rather than emotional appeals." As Andrew's press conference began to lose cohesion, with reporters increasingly pressing for specific responses to the financial disclosures rather than accepting his broad characterizations, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Eleanor Westbrook. "The market is responding exactly as we hoped," she reported without preamble when I answered. "Financial analysts are publicly questioning Andrew's version of events, citing the comprehensive disclosure package. Harrington's stock is also taking a hit, down 3% on concerns about their oversight of Caldwell's investments. Harold has just issued a personal statement directly contradicting Andrew's claims about legacy protection," I informed her. "It should be published within the hour." Eleanor's satisfaction was evident even through the phone. Perfect timing. The combined effect should neutralize any remaining concerns among institutional investors. She paused before adding, "How is Harold holding up? This can't be easy for him despite everything Andrew has done." The question reflected Eleanor's emotional intelligence alongside her business acumen, a recognition that beneath the corporate mechanisms lay human relationships with their attendant complexities. I glanced at Harold, who was watching his son's increasingly desperate performance with an expression of resigned sadness rather than anger. "He's showing the same strength that built Caldwell Manufacturing," I replied, knowing Harold could hear my assessment. "Doing what's necessary, however difficult." After finishing the call, I rejoined Harold at the window overlooking the lake. Andrew's press conference had concluded, his closing remarks lacking the confident authority of his opening statement. The financial news coverage had already shifted to analysis, with expert commentators dissecting the merger details rather than focusing on the personal drama Andrew had attempted to highlight. "You know," Harold said thoughtfully, "when Edward, my father, was nearing the end of his life, he told me his greatest regret wasn't the breakdown with Joseph Westbrook. It was waiting too long to try making amends." He turned to face me directly. He said something I've never forgotten. "The measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, Harold. It's in how they respond when those mistakes become clear." The wisdom resonated beyond the immediate situation, speaking to both corporate governance and personal integrity. "Andrew still has that choice before him," I noted. He could acknowledge the financial issues and cooperate with the transition. Harold's smile held gentle skepticism. He could, but that would require him to value substance over appearance, to accept accountability rather than seeking to assign blame. I haven't seen those qualities in my son for many years now. The realization carried a profound sadness that no corporate success could entirely mitigate, a father's recognition that his son had chosen a path that prioritized image over integrity, personal gain over principled leadership. Yet within that acknowledgement lay a certain peace, the clarity that comes from facing difficult truths rather than perpetuating comfortable illusions. "What happens now?" I asked, though the question extended beyond the immediate business situation to the more personal dimensions of the dramatic changes unfolding. "Now," Harold replied with quiet certainty, "we build something better from what remains. Eleanor Westbrook has offered a path forward that honors the best of both companies' traditions while creating something stronger than either could be alone." He placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "And you, Rebecca, will play a crucial role in that future, not as a Caldwell by marriage, but as a leader in your own right." Before I could respond, Elaine appeared at the door. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a call for you from the Lakeside Business Journal. They'd like additional comment on your statement regarding the merger." Harold nodded, the momentary vulnerability giving way to the composed business leader who had guided Caldwell Manufacturing through decades of challenges. "I'll take it in my study. Rebecca, help yourself to more wine. This may take a few minutes." Left alone with my thoughts, I moved to the window where the afternoon sun cast golden light across the lake. In the distance, I could just make out the Caldwell Manufacturing facility, its distinctive roofline a familiar landmark on the lakeside skyline. Soon, that building would bear both the Caldwell and Westbrook names, a visible symbol of the corporate transformation underway. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Caldwell-Westbrook merger proceeds despite opposition from former CEO. The former designation was telling. Andrew's corporate identity had already been reshaped in the public narrative, his authority diminished by both board action and market response. The financial world had assessed his claims and found them, wanting against the documented evidence we had provided. Another alert followed. Harold Caldwell issues strong statement supporting merger, contradicting son's claims. The business press had wasted no time in publishing Harold's decisive intervention, effectively ending any momentum Andrew might have generated through his counter-narrative. A text message from Diana followed the news alerts. Andrew attempted to enter the executive floor again, but was escorted out by security. His office has been secured and all access credentials deactivated per protocol. The update carried a certain finality, the physical manifestation of Andrew's corporate removal. The office he had occupied for a decade, from which he had issued directives and conducted the business affairs that had gradually undermined the company's financial foundation was now off-limits to him. The personal items that had surrounded him, golf trophies, industry awards, family photographs, were being cataloged and packed, the space already transitioning toward its next occupant. I replied to Diana with brief instructions about handling Andrew's personal effects with appropriate dignity despite the circumstances, then set my phone aside. The practical details would continue to unfold according to established protocols, the corporate machinery adapting to its new configuration with remarkable efficiency. Harold returned from taking the journalist's call, his expression reflecting satisfaction with how the conversation had gone. They're running a feature on the historical significance of the merger in tomorrow's edition. I took the opportunity to emphasize the complementary strengths of both companies and the continuity of values despite leadership changes. The perfect framing, I acknowledged, focusing on institutional strength rather than individual personalities. Harold nodded in agreement, resuming his seat with a thoughtful expression. Rebecca, there's something we haven't discussed yet, something important for the next phase of this transition. The serious tone caught my attention. What is it? Your role going forward. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze direct and assessing. The merger agreement specifies your position as CFO of the combined entity, a role that leverages your financial expertise and recognizes your contribution to preserving Caldwell's viable operations. I nodded, familiar with these provisions that Eleanor and I had negotiated during our planning sessions. The position makes sense given my background and the particular challenges of integrating the financial systems. It does, Harold agreed. But I wonder if it fully recognizes what you've demonstrated during this crisis, not just financial acumen, but leadership capability of the highest order. The observation hung between us, its implications extending beyond the current arrangement. Eleanor Westbrook will be CEO of the combined company, I noted. A position she's earned through decades of successful leadership at Westbrook Industries. Without question, Harold acknowledged. And she's the right person to guide the initial integration. But corporations of this size typically develop succession plans that look 5 to 10 years ahead. He paused meaningfully. When Eleanor approached me about the possibility of a merger 6 months ago, she mentioned that she envisions transitioning to a board role within the next 4 years. She's been considering who might eventually succeed her. The revelation that Eleanor had initiated merger discussions even before I had approached Michael Turner with my concerns about Caldwell's finances was surprising, but made strategic sense. She had recognized the potential complementary fit between our companies and had been patient enough to wait for the right opportunity. You're suggesting that I should be considering a longer-term path to CEO, I said, processing the implications of Harold's disclosure. I'm suggesting, he replied carefully, that you should recognize the full range of your capabilities, rather than defining yourself primarily through financial expertise. What you've accomplished over the past 6 months, identifying problems, documenting evidence, building strategic alliances, and ultimately orchestrating a solution that preserves what matters most, demonstrates executive leadership at its finest. His assessment was generous but not inaccurate. The skills I had employed in navigating Caldwell's crisis extended well beyond traditional financial management into strategic leadership territory. Still, the idea of explicitly positioning myself on a CEO trajectory felt presumptuous given the immediate challenges of the merger integration. One step at a time, I suggested, though Harold's words had planted a seed that would require careful consideration. The CFO role will be demanding enough for the near future. Harold smiled, recognizing my cautious approach but not entirely accepting it. Just promise me you'll keep your options open. The combined company will need leadership that understands both our histories and has the vision to build something greater than either could achieve alone. Our conversation was interrupted by another news alert on my phone. this one more personal than the previous notifications. Andrew Caldwell files for divorce, cites irreconcilable differences. The timing was calculated, of course, with his business counter-narrative failing to gain traction. Andrew had shifted to personal territory, likely hoping that announcing divorce proceedings would reinforce his characterization of the merger as motivated by marital animus rather than legitimate business concerns. Harold glanced at the alert with resigned expectation. And so begins the next chapter. Are you prepared for this to become public in this way? I considered the question carefully. The divorce itself was inevitable given the circumstances, but having Andrew initiate the proceedings rather than waiting for me to file carried certain implications. It doesn't change anything substantive, I decided. The business decisions stand on their documented merits regardless of personal circumstances. True, Harold agreed, but perception matters, especially during transitions. Andrew is attempting to position himself as the aggrieved party in both professional and personal contexts. I found myself unexpectedly calm in the face of this development. 6 months ago, the public announcement of our marriage's end might have provoked anxiety or at least discomfort. Now, it felt like the formal acknowledgement of a reality that had been evident for much longer than I had been willing to recognize. Let him try, I said finally. The facts speak for themselves, both in the financial documentation and in the funds he transferred out of our joint accounts without discussion. Truth has a persistence that narratives can't overcome in the long run. Harold studied me with evident pride. You've changed these past months. There's a certainty in you that wasn't there before, a confidence in your own judgment that doesn't require external validation. His observation struck a chord of recognition. The process of documenting Andrew's financial misconduct, building the case for intervention, and ultimately helping to orchestrate the merger solution had indeed transformed me in ways I was only beginning to fully appreciate. The woman who had once carefully calibrated her opinions to avoid contradicting her husband's public positions had become someone who could stand firmly on her own assessment, backed by evidence and conviction. Crisis has a way of clarifying priorities, I acknowledged, and revealing character, both in others and in ourselves. Our conversation was interrupted by Elaine, who appeared with a message that Eleanor Westbrook had arrived and was waiting in the reception area. She mentioned something about reviewing the joint statement for tomorrow's employee town hall, Elaine reported. The town hall meeting would be the first opportunity for employees of both companies to hear directly from leadership about how the merger would affect their daily operations and future prospects. Getting the messaging right was crucial for maintaining morale and productivity during the transition. Please show her in, Harold requested, a new energy animating his movements as he cleared space at the table for our impromptu meeting. Eleanor entered with her characteristic purposeful stride, carrying a tablet and small portfolio. Harold. She greeted him warmly, the respect between them evident despite their company's historical rivalry. Thank you for making time on what has already been a momentous day. A day 60 years in the making, Harold replied with subtle humor, referencing the original rift between their grandfathers. Though I doubt either of our predecessors could have imagined the circumstances that would finally bring Caldwell and Westbrook together. As Eleanor joined us at the table and we began reviewing the draft employee communications, I was struck by the historical weight of the moment. 3 people working collaboratively to merge companies that had defined themselves partly through competition with each other for generations. The rivalry that had shaped our corporate identities was transforming into partnership, creating something that honored both legacies while opening new possibilities. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lakeside, the water reflecting golden light that seemed to connect the shoreline where we sat with the distant silhouette of the Caldwell Manufacturing facility. Tomorrow, employees would gather in that building's auditorium to hear about their company's new direction. They would bring questions, concerns, and the natural anxiety that accompanies significant change. What they would find, I reflected as we refined the language of our joint presentation. Was leadership committed to transparency, to preserving what worked well in both organizations, and to building something stronger than either company could achieve alone? They would discover that sometimes what appears to be an ending of independent operation, of familiar structures, of traditional rivalries, is actually the beginning of something more substantial and enduring. Andrew had emptied our accounts, thinking it would give him leverage in a carefully orchestrated separation on his terms. Instead, that action had catalyzed a sequence of events that would reshape not just our personal lives, but the entire corporate landscape of Lakeside. The betrayal that had begun as a personal wound had ultimately led to institutional renewal and transformation. As Eleanor outlined her vision for the combined company's first 100 days, her emphasis on operational excellence and market expansion balanced by community commitment and employee development, I felt a growing certainty that the difficult path we had navigated had led to the right destination. Not an ending, but a new beginning for Caldwell, for Westbrook, and for me. Possibilities unfolding that none of us could have anticipated 6 months earlier. Harold caught my eye across the table, his expression conveying both understanding of the journey and confidence in the direction ahead. The legacy he had protected throughout his career would continue, though in a form his father might never have imagined. And I would continue as well, no longer defined primarily as Andrew's wife or even as Caldwell's financial guardian, but as a leader in my own right, bringing strategic vision and steady guidance to whatever challenges lay ahead. Sometimes the most effective response to betrayal isn't dramatic confrontation, but methodical, strategic action that creates space for something better to emerge from what once seemed broken beyond repair. Andrew had emptied our accounts, but in doing so, had ultimately opened doors to possibilities I might never have discovered otherwise. The future stretched before us, uncertain in its specifics but clear in its direction. Forward, together, building on the best of what had come before, while creating something new that honored both our shared history and distinct strengths. The corporate chess game that had begun with Andrew's betrayal was reaching its conclusion, but the board was being reset for a different kind of game altogether, one focused on creation rather than competition, on building rather than winning. As the golden afternoon light began to fade into evening, we finalized our presentation for tomorrow's town hall, each of us contributing perspectives shaped by different experiences but united by common purpose. Outside, Lakeside continued its daily rhythms, the water reflecting the changing sky, constant yet ever-changing, much like the business landscape we were now transforming together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.